Ladies and gentlemen, let us pause for a moment and reflect on a question that has haunted us since time immemorial. Why do we fear death? The fear of death is an ancient anxiety, a question that has puzzled philosophers, poets, and everyday people alike. And yet I invite you to consider that this fear, in its essence, is not so much a fear of death itself, but a fear of our own misunderstanding of what it truly is. We are creatures of consciousness, and we have built a story of separation from each other, from nature, from the world. We identify with the body, the mind, and the personal narrative that we call me. But in this story, we forget something fundamental. We are not isolated entities. We are part of the greater flow of existence. To fear death is to fear the end of the illusion of separateness. In truth, death is merely a return to the infinite. The individual self, as we know it, is like a wave that rises, crests, and eventually falls back into the ocean. And yet, because we cling to the wave, we are terrified of the fall. We fear death too because it is the ultimate unknown. It is the final frontier, one that no human being can experience and return to tell the tale. We don't fear the moment of death itself, but the mystery it holds. It's the vast open space of the unknown that triggers our discomfort. How strange it is that we who journey through life facing the unknown every day find death to be so threatening. And yet, is it not the unknown that brings forth all the beauty and wonder of life? The unknown is where possibility thrives, where creativity blossoms, and where the deepest mysteries of the universe are veiled. But beyond the fear of the unknown, I believe we fear death because we have become too attached. We cling to our identities, the me that we've built over years of experience, the body that we call our own, the roles we play, and the relationships we form. The idea of death means the loss of all these attachments, and so, naturally, the ego fights against it. Yet this attachment to the self, this clinging to the familiar, keeps us locked in a false notion of permanence. For in truth, everything changes. Every breath we take is a small death, every night a surrender to the stillness, every moment a transition from one state of being to another. Life and death are part of a continuous flow. The more we resist this flow, the more we suffer. I invite you to reconsider death not as an ending, but as a transformation. In the grand dance of the universe, there is no beginning and no end, only a cycle. Life and death are the same river flowing in two directions. Death does not steal life from us, it is life. To live fully is to embrace the impermanence of life. And when we embrace the transience of each moment, death no longer becomes a fearsome thing. It becomes a companion, a reminder to live now, to savor this fleeting existence. The illusion of separation is at the heart of much of our fear, particularly our fear of death. We have been conditioned through centuries of cultural, societal, and personal conditioning to see ourselves as distinct, isolated entities. From the moment we are born, we are told, in countless ways, that we are individual beings separate from everything else. We are taught to identify with the body, the mind, the thoughts, and the stories we tell ourselves. This identification is so deeply ingrained that it becomes the very foundation of how we see the world and, more importantly, how we see ourselves. We experience life as a stream of events that seem to happen to me, a distinct self which moves through the world as though it were separate from the world itself. We observe nature, but we do not feel that we are part of it. We see the stars above us and the earth beneath us, but we fail to recognize that we are not separate from these things. We are nature itself, just as the stars and the soil are. There is no true division between you and the air you breathe, between you and the earth beneath your feet, between you and the universe itself. Everything that exists is interconnected, a vast web of relationships. But we don't see it this way because we are taught to experience ourselves as separate from it all. This separation is not an objective truth of reality, but a construct, a product of thought. When we think of ourselves as I or me, we create a mental boundary, a line that seems to define where we end and where the world begins. But in reality, this boundary is a mere illusion. The body is not separate from the earth. It is made of the same elements, the same matter that exists in the soil, in the air, in the stars. The body is just a temporary arrangement of atoms, and yet we treat it as if it is mine, as if it is separate from everything else. The air we breathe is not outside of us, it is part of us. It is part of us, circulating through our bodies, becoming us as much as we become it. And this illusion of separation extends to the way we relate to other people. We think of others as distinct, separate beings, you and me. We believe that there is a fundamental division between us. And this division creates conflict, division, and fear. But just as we are not separate from the earth or the stars, we are not separate from each other. We are all part of the same whole, a vast interconnected system in which every part is related to every other part. What happens to one part of the system reverberates throughout the whole. Just as a wave on the surface of the ocean is not separate from the ocean itself, we are not separate from each other, nor from the universe that surrounds us. This illusion of separation is the root of our fear of death. If we see ourselves as isolated, as individual entities, then death becomes a terrifying prospect. To die is to lose the self, to end the story of me. But what if this idea of self is not real? What if the very thing we fear losing is nothing more than a temporary construct of the mind? What if we are not separate individual entities, but rather we are expressions of the universe itself, arising and dissolving as part of the cosmic flow? Death then is not the end of the self, because the self was never truly separate to begin with. It is a return, a reabsorption into the whole. Just as a wave returns to the ocean, so too does the individual return to the infinite. There is no loss in death, there is only transformation, a shifting from one form to another. The body, which we once saw as a separate, distinct entity, becomes part of the earth again, nourishing new life, continuing the eternal cycle. The fear of death, then, is the fear of losing the illusion of separation. It is the fear of letting go of the sense of me as a separate, isolated being. But when we realize that we were never truly separate to begin with, when we see that the self is a wave on the ocean, a temporary manifestation of the whole, the fear of death dissolves. Death becomes a natural part of the eternal flow, a return to the source from which we emerged. And so, to overcome the fear of death, we must first see through the illusion of separation. We must recognize that we are not isolated beings, but expressions of the same fundamental reality that permeates all things. We are not separate from the world, we are the world. Death is not the end of us, it is the return to the whole. When we understand this, we can embrace death not as a threat, but as a natural part of life, a beautiful transformation in the endless flow of existence. The fear of the unknown is one of the most profound and persistent fears we experience in life. We are creatures built on patterns on the familiar and on the known. We take comfort in the things we can understand, things we can predict, things we can hold on to. The known world is a world that we can navigate, that we can control, that we can categorize. But there is always a limit to what we can know. And beyond that limit lies the great expanse of the unknown. And it is this unknown that we fear so deeply. From the very moment we come into the world, we are thrown into the unknown. As infants, we know little beyond the sensations of our immediate environment. We have no understanding of where we are or why we are here. But over time, we begin to form a map of the world. We learn the names of things, the laws of cause and effect, and we develop a sense of control over our environment. But this map we create is just that, a map, a limited representation of something much more vast. The reality of the world is far beyond our comprehension, far beyond the confines of our understanding. As we grow, we become increasingly skilled at living within the known world. We develop routines, habits, and systems of thought that allow us to function with a sense of certainty and predictability. We believe that we know what will happen next, that we can anticipate the outcomes of our actions, that we can shape our lives according to the rules we understand. But then, inevitably, life throws us into moments of uncertainty, moments where the known world breaks down and we are confronted with the unknown. The unknown is not just the space where things are unfamiliar, it is the space where control slips away. When we encounter the unknown, we are reminded of our vulnerability, of our inability to fully understand or control the forces at work around us. We are faced with the terrifying realization that despite all our knowledge and all our planning, we cannot predict everything. The future in its entirety is unknown, and the present moment, which constantly slips away from our grasp, is always new, always unfolding in ways we cannot fully predict or grasp. It is this unpredictability, this unknowingness, that strikes at the heart of our deepest anxieties. And yet, what is the unknown? What exactly is it that we fear? The unknown is not something that exists outside of us, separate from us, but rather something that is an integral part of our experience. We are constantly moving through the unknown moment by moment, whether we are aware of it or not. The future is always unknown, and yet it is not something that exists as an abstract entity that we must confront at some distant point in time. It is here now, in every breath, in every thought, in every sensation we experience. We live in the unknown, even when we think we are living in the known. In this sense, the unknown is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It is a part of life, just as change is a part of life. We cannot live without the unknown, just as we cannot live without change. To live is to dance with uncertainty, to flow with the currents of existence as they shift and change. The unknown is where all possibilities lie. It is where the new emerges, where creativity arises, where life itself unfolds. Without the unknown, there would be no room for growth, for transformation, for discovery. The unknown is the very ground of potential. But our fear of the unknown comes from our attachment to certainty. We are afraid to let go of the familiar because it makes us feel safe, because it gives us a sense of control. We cling to the known because it provides us with a sense of stability, even if that stability is illusory. The unknown challenges that illusion. It asks us to trust in something deeper, something beyond our limited understanding. It asks us to surrender to the flow of life and to accept that we are not in control, that we do not have all the answers, that the universe does not operate according to our plans or our desires. But in this surrender there is freedom. The unknown, when we stop fearing it, opens us to the beauty of life itself. It opens us to the mystery of existence, to the vastness of the universe that lies beyond the limits of our comprehension. When we stop seeing the unknown as a threat and begin to see it as an opportunity for exploration, for discovery, for growth, we begin to live in a different way. We move from a place of fear and resistance to a place of openness and curiosity. We fear the unknown because we fear loss of control, loss of stability, loss of the self that we think we are. But in truth, the unknown is where we encounter our deepest selves. It is in the unknown that we face our true nature, that we are reminded of our place in the vast web of existence. To live fully is to embrace the unknown, to allow it to guide us, to trust in its wisdom. It is the unknown that teaches us to live in the present moment, to let go of the need for certainty and control, and to be open to the unfolding of life as it is. The fear of the unknown is ultimately a fear of life itself, for life is unknown, constantly changing, unpredictable, and ever expanding. To fear the unknown is to fear the very essence of what it means to be alive. And yet, when we let go of this fear, we find that life, in all its mystery and uncertainty, is far more beautiful and full of potential than we ever imagined. It is the unknown that gives life its richness, its depth, its wonder. It is the unknown that makes life worth living. The nature of change is something we encounter every single moment of our lives, yet it is one of the most elusive concepts we struggle to understand. Change is the only constant in existence, yet we often try to deny it, resist it, and mold our lives in a way that seeks permanence. But permanence, as we imagine it, does not exist. It is a fantasy, a fleeting illusion that the mind clings to because it seeks control, security, and stability. Change, on the other hand, is the natural order of things. It is not something that happens to us or around us. It is something that is happening through us, within us, and as us all the time. We can look to nature to understand the profound and ever-present reality of change. A tree is not the same tree from one moment to the next. Its leaves grow, wither, and fall. Its roots spread deeper into the earth, and its bark gradually transforms with time. The river, too, is never the same twice. It flows constantly, and though its course may appear unchanged, it is in a state of constant movement and transformation, with each drop of water experiencing its own journey through the stream. In fact, there is no part of the world that is immune to change. Every rock, every star, every living being is in a continuous state of transformation. The seasons themselves shift and evolve, bringing warmth, cold, life, and decay in an endless cycle of becoming and passing away. But we, as human beings, resist this natural flow of change. We create images of ourselves that we desperately try to preserve, identities that we think must remain fixed and unchanging. We build lives, relationships, and systems that we believe should stay constant, and when they do not, we feel threatened. Our fear of change comes from the belief that we are static, that we are separate from the ever-moving tide of existence, and that change is a force that must be fought against. We try to hold on to the past, to grasp for the future, and in doing so, we miss the present moment, the only time in which we can truly experience life. Change is not something we can control or avoid. We may try to stop time, freeze a moment, or keep things as they are. But this is like trying to hold onto water with an open hand. It slips through our fingers no matter how hard we try. The effort to avoid change is like trying to fight the very rhythm of the universe. The more we resist, the more suffering we create for ourselves. But what if we could stop resisting? What if we could let go of the illusion of permanence and embrace the truth of change as the very essence of life? Change is not something that happens to us from the outside, it is something that emerges from within the flow of life itself. When we look closely, we see that we are always changing, always in motion. Our thoughts are changing, our emotions are shifting, our bodies are aging, and our experiences are continuously unfolding. We are not the same person we were yesterday, and yet we cling to the idea that we are. We hold on to the idea of an I and identity that remains unchanged through time, but this I is itself an ever-changing process, a fleeting collection of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. We are, in essence, a river of becoming, a flow of energy and matter constantly transforming moment by moment. To understand the nature of change is to understand that we are not separate from it. We are not observers of change, we are participants in it. Just as the wave is not separate from the ocean, we are not separate from the ongoing dance of life. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all part of this dynamic process of transformation. To live is to be in a state of constant flux, constantly becoming something new. And this is not a threat, but a profound opportunity for growth, creativity, and discovery. When we resist change, we suffer. But when we embrace it, we free ourselves from the illusion of control and permanence. Change does not need to be feared. It is the very fabric of our existence. It is what allows life to flow, to unfold, to evolve. Without change, there would be no new beginnings, no new ideas, no new experiences. The world would become stagnant, lifeless. Change is the pulse of life, the heartbeat of the universe. It is the process by which everything is born, lives, and dies, and dies. To resist change is to resist life itself. But change, in its true nature, is not something that happens according to our personal desires or agendas. It does not bend to our will. It flows according to its own rhythm, sometimes slow and gentle, sometimes rapid and forceful. Just as the river carves its path through the land, so too does change carve its path through our lives. Sometimes it brings us to places we do not expect. Sometimes it challenges us in ways we cannot foresee. But even in the most difficult moments of change, there is an opportunity for growth. Change forces us to evolve, to adapt, to learn new things about ourselves and the world. It asks us to release our attachment to what we think should be and accept what is. The nature of change is both humbling and liberating. It reminds us that we are not fixed beings, but dynamic processes. We are not here to control or resist change, but to participate in it, to allow ourselves to flow with the currents of life. Just as the seasons move in cycles, so too do our lives move through cycles of birth, growth, decline, and renewal. Each stage of life brings its own set of challenges and blessings, and each stage is part of the grand arc of existence. When we surrender to the truth of change, we begin to see it as a dance, a beautiful unfolding that takes us from one moment to the next. We stop clinging to the past, stop fearing the future, and start living in the present. The more we accept change as a natural and essential part of life, the more we open ourselves to the fullness of experience. We realize that nothing is truly lost in the flow of change, for everything is transformed. Everything is transformed, everything is recycled, everything is part of the eternal process of becoming. In the end, the nature of change is the nature of life itself. It is the ever-turning wheel that moves us from one experience to the next, from one moment to the next. To understand change is to understand the essence of being alive. It is not something to fight against, but something to be embraced, something to celebrate. Change is the ground upon which all life is built, and it is through change that we experience the fullness of existence. Without change, we would simply be frozen in time, trapped in an illusion of permanence. But with change, we are free. With change, we are alive. Attachment and identity are deeply intertwined forces that govern much of our experience in the world. The essence of attachment lies in the tendency to cling to things, people, ideas, or even emotions, believing that they provide us with stability, security, or a sense of purpose. These attachments, however, are not inherently problematic. They become so when we begin to identify with them, to see them as the foundation of who we are. Attachment is, in many ways, a natural impulse. We form attachments to those we love, to the objects we cherish, and to the ideas and beliefs that shape our understanding of the world. But when we confuse these attachments with our identity, when we mistakenly equate them with who we truly are, we find ourselves ensnared in a web of illusions. At the core of attachment is the belief that this, whatever it may be, is essential for our well-being. We attach ourselves to things because we believe they complete us, define us, or give us a sense of meaning. We attach to our possessions, our relationships, our career, our status, and our ideologies because we believe that these things somehow define us. The car we drive, the clothes we wear, the work we do, all of these are seen as symbols of our worth, and in turn we become attached to them. We do not simply see them as objects, we see them as extensions of who we are. This attachment creates a false sense of self, one that is built upon external circumstances rather than an understanding of our true nature. This attachment leads us to identify with what we possess. We are not merely people who own things, we become what we own. We become the job we have, the house we live in, the car we drive, or even the beliefs we hold. Our identity becomes shaped by these external factors. The more we cling to them, the more they define us, and the more we become bound to them. And when these things are taken away, whether through loss, change, or circumstances beyond our control, we are left feeling empty, bereft, and lost. We are not just mourning the loss of objects or people, we are mourning the loss of the self we had created around them. Our identity, built upon these attachments, begins to crumble, and in the face of this loss, we experience fear, confusion, and suffering. The root of this suffering lies in the mistaken belief that our identity is something fixed, something permanent, something that can be defined and held onto. We think of ourselves as stable, unchanging entities, separate from the world around us then. But in reality, identity is a fluid, ever-changing process, a dance of energy and awareness that shifts with every breath, every thought, every experience. Identity, when viewed in this way, is not something we can grasp or possess, but something we experience, something we flow through. It is not a static thing to cling to, but a dynamic process of becoming, constantly evolving as we move through life. The more we attach to the idea of a fixed identity, the more we become trapped in a cycle of desire, fear, and disappointment. We seek validation, recognition, and approval from the world around us because we believe that these will affirm who we are. But this external validation is fleeting and unreliable. The world is constantly shifting, and so too is the sense of self that we try to build around it. When we attach our sense of worth to something outside of ourselves, we are always at the mercy of external circumstances, and when these circumstances change, as they inevitably do, our sense of self is thrown into disarray. Our attachment to identity is also tied to our attachment to permanence. We crave stability, certainty, and control because we believe that this will provide us with a sense of safety. We create rigid concepts of who we are, ideas that are fixed and unchanging because the unknown, the fluid, and the impermanent are terrifying to the mind. But the very nature of existence is change. Everything is in flux, nothing remains the same. To hold on to a fixed sense of identity is to resist the flow of life itself. It is to deny the inherent impermanence of the world and to create suffering by clinging to something that is not meant to be held onto. When we release our attachment to identity, when we stop defining ourselves by external circumstances, we begin to experience a deeper sense of freedom. We cease to be bound by the expectations and judgments of the world. We no longer see ourselves as separate, fixed individuals, but as part of the ever-changing flow of life. We realize that our true nature is not the roles we play, the things we possess, or the labels we carry, but the awareness that perceives them all. We are not the sum of our possessions, our achievements, or our relationships. We are the awareness that experiences them. We are not what we cling to. We are the space in which everything appears and dissolves. To let go of attachment to identity is not to abandon ourselves or to deny who we are. Rather, it is to release the false sense of self that is built upon external factors. It is to recognize that our identity is not something that can be grasped, defined, or pinned down, but something that is ever-changing, ever-expanding, and ever-flowing. Our true self is not bound by the roles we play, the objects we own, or the beliefs we hold. It is the awareness that witnesses all of these. When we see this, we stop clinging to the illusion of a fixed self and begin to live more freely, more fully, and more authentically.